Great to be with Alan Benz again. He has been very nice in his introduction. The reality of it is that if you look at, certainly beginning in 1996 to the present, Alan is still regarded in many ways as the industry standard for speakerships and the role that he did there. He certainly was to me and to others. And so every time that everyone becomes a speaker now, they are compared to Alan. And that's not an exaggeration when I say that. I think both this community and the state is very grateful for the service he provided in public office for those 8 years. And it is great to be with you and great to see that you're doing well. Here's a little known fact he didn't tell you. Though 2 years before he became speaker and I was lined up after him, we did sit next to each other on the floor. But when you run for speaker, you're still trying to get people to support you. So I spent a lot of time kind of walking around the chamber. And if you've ever watched the Florida legislature, those votes turn pretty quickly. You're just pressing the buttons. I was never in my chair, and he always was. And so he ended up voting for me, which is allowed under the rules. And so he basically cast about, I don't know, 60–70% of my votes. He knew I was going to vote. He was pressing that button. And the side benefit of that, this little known fact, is that later that year I was named the Bay County Legislator of the Year because of my voting record. Actually, it's an area I know very well. We actually come up here quite often as a family, almost every 4th of July. I can tell you that I believe, I haven't proven this, but I believe I am the only one person in Miami-Dade County that has a 3080 sticker on their truck. But it's not always nice when we come up here, and I'll tell you why. Because I have a Gator license plate. And so my kids are always asking me, why are those people, look, Dad, they're saying we're #1. And I said, no, son, that's the wrong finger. But I've been known to reach across the aisle and work with people on important issues. Alvin, you'll be pleased to know, and most of you, that Senator Nelson and I have an extraordinary working relationship. In fact, I would say our working relationship between Senator Nelson and myself is the best, as good or better than anyone else, including people of the same party who share a state delegation. We don't always vote the same way, but we are always working together. I can tell you that in the 5.5 years I've been there, I have not had a single negative interaction with him or with his staff. And I think that's a testament to him, who was there before I was, but I also think it's to our state. And so that's good news for our state and for our country. Obviously, this is a community that has a number of local issues that we care deeply about that I have been involved in different ways. I am a recreational fisherman myself, though not much these days, unfortunately, but as you may have read in the New York Times about a year ago, I am the owner of a luxury speed yacht, or as I like to call it, my 24-foot fishing boat. As I explained to the New York Times, any boat where you have to go to the bathroom off the side of the boat is not a luxury speed boat. But in any event, I know that, so we are very deeply involved. I think that's a good standard. But we're deeply involved in all these issues regarding the closing of fisheries, which has a tremendous impact, not just on recreational fishing, on tourism, on people that are scheduling visits to come into a community and can no longer do so, and ask the charter captains, because there's so much uncertainty, and the science is not good. I mean, no one cares about the health of the fisheries more than people that like fishing, and people that make a living off fishing. And when the science is bad and the data is bad, we're making decisions that aren't justified, and it's hurting people. Not just charter captains, it's hurting the hotels, it's hurting all the other industries that support it. And so that's an issue we continue to push very hard on as the chairman of the subcommittee on oceans. Obviously, the oil spill was a dramatic impact on the entire area, and we're very pleased that after some early hiccups, that the funds and the process for the distribution of those funds, which I believe is now we're at the third pile, right, in terms of distribution of some of those settlement funds, and that will include hopefully improvements to local infrastructure, which are critical for long-term. A little further away, but Apalachicola Bay is an issue we've been very involved with, trying to force these states to the table before we lose this industry that's not just historic and part of our culture in the state, but these are families who have been in this industry for generations who are going to be wiped out because the state of Georgia has decided to hold back water in a way that is unfair and, by the way, environmentally unwise. And that's in court, as you know, and the governor of Georgia doesn't like me very much these days because of it, but we're going to continue to push to get that issue solved. And you can't come to Northwest Florida without talking about the importance of our military at a time when military budgets are being gutted. That's not an exaggeration. This sequester is the craziest thing. A lot of crazy stuff happens in Washington. It is one of the craziest things that's ever happened. This sequester is not helping to balance our budget. It is gutting our military capabilities. We have less training hours, less time in the air for our pilots, planes that are older than the pilots, sometimes double their age, that are being flown. We make a fundamental promise to our men and women in uniform that we're never going to put them in a fair fight, because they're going to have better training, better equipment, and better intelligence than any foe they will ever face. That is a promise we will eventually not be able to keep if these current trends continue. And so obviously that has an impact on the local economy because of the presence of our military communities up and down the Northwest area, but also because of the national security of our country. And I would be remiss if I didn't recognize our partners, particularly our Canadian partners, and thank you for being here today, General, who are extraordinary partners in the effort to keep our country and the world safer. And we thank you for that partnership. Now I want to set the scene about national issues, because there's a lot of negativity about the things that are going on, and a lot of our problems seem unsolvable. It reminds me of a story I heard recently. A young lady was walking in the desert or on the beach and came upon a genie lamp in the sand. Now you know it's a joke, right? So she, rubs the lamp and out pops the genie. And she says, "Oh, great, I'll get my 3 wishes." The genie says, "No, times are tough. You get 1 wish." It's like, all right, okay. I went to the University of Florida. I'm very altruistic, she says. Sorry, I know, right? And people got really mad at me when I made a joke about FSC during the campaign. It's horrifying. I was like, come on. But anyway, she brought the lamp, I pops the genie. Any wish you want. She opens up a map of the Middle East and she goes, "I want peace in this part of the world." And the genie says to her, "Look, we can't do that. That's too hard. Some things are just impossible. Ask for anything else." She says, "All right, here's what I want. I want a man who will walk with me, take long walks on the beach, have long conversations, be considerate, be kind, listen to me." And the genie says, "Let me see that map again." So some things are impossible. I know some things seem impossible. But I want to set the scene for you, right? I want you to ask yourself this. And I'm about to talk to you about our problems, but before I do, I want to, what country would you rather be? Even with all the challenges we have, we've got real challenges. We're about to talk about a few of them. Who would you trade places with? Don't tell me you'd rather be China, because you wouldn't. You can't breathe the air. You can't speak your mind. You can't even go on any website you want. They don't teach all of the children. If you're facing any sort of disability or you just don't progress fast enough, they leave you behind. What country would you rather be? Russia? Run by a gangster? What nation on earth would you rather be? The answer is there isn't one. There isn't a country on earth that you would trade places with. Not now, not even with all of our problems. And I think every single day we need to thank God for the opportunity to be Americans and to live in this extraordinary place. I had occasion over the last year and a half to be involved in another endeavor, to travel the country and do 12 televised debates, and it was an interesting process. And but I also got to learn even more about America than I've ever known before. And one of the things that I learned was America's not a government. America's a people. It's not a government. We keep saying our government's messed up and so our country's messed up. Two separate things. Our government is messed up, especially at the federal level. But our people are still strong. They still have big dreams. They still work hard. By the millions, they get up every single morning. And they raise their families, and they pay their taxes and their mortgage, and they respect one another, and they create jobs in a community, and they risk money to open up a new business or expand an existing one, and they volunteer, and they make less money than they could because they're making a difference at a Head Start center, and they donate money to charity, and they teach Sunday school. Every single day, millions of people across this country are doing that. That is America. But we have challenges. And the primary challenge we have is an extraordinary sense of insecurity. Economic insecurity and safety. Economic insecurity because we are living through the most transformational economic moment in human history. The Industrial Revolution was incredibly disruptive, but it happened over 100 years. This revolution is happening every 3 years. In essence, you can be on the cutting edge of any industry and within 3 years be obsolete. That is the pace of change. It's a global economy, like it or not. Our customers, our clients, our competitors are just as likely to come from halfway around the world as they are to come from halfway across town. Virtually any industry you're in, you are susceptible to global pressures. The cost of labor, the cost of materials. I remember when China was building a lot of things, you couldn't get steel. And so it is a globalized economy in many ways, and it is a technologically driven one. And it has completely changed the nature of our economy. And whether we like it or not, we can't turn the clock back. But it has displaced people. There are people that have worked for 3 decades in a certain industry or job, who their whole lives were told the very basic promise was, you work hard, you play by the rules, you may not be a billionaire, but you're going to have a good life, you're going to raise your kids, they're going to go off to a better life, you're going to retire with dignity. That's the basic American promise, and for millions of people that isn't true anymore. They do work hard. They work longer and harder than ever, and they don't make enough, and everything costs more. Okay. I know people. I've lived this in times in my life. The mailman's down the street, and you're like, oh, I wonder what bill's in the mail today I didn't see coming. And so this insecurity is real, and it has displaced millions of people in this economic transformation. The second problem we have is just safety. Radical Islam is a threat. I don't mean this as a slight towards anyone. I recognize that the vast and enormous majority of adherents to the Muslim faith in the world are not radical jihadists. But there's millions of them, of people around the world that have misinterpreted or have adhered to a radical interpretation of their faith that doesn't just justify, it calls for the murder of innocents. This is a real threat. You add to that the threat of Russia's aggression in Europe, which threatens to destabilize the world order that was established after the Second World War, the rise of China, who's trying to take over the most important shipping lane on this planet, the South China Sea, a place where 40% of global commerce goes through every day. I promise you there are multiple things in this room that were on a boat or on a ship that went through the South China Sea, and if they control it, they get to decide how much of those things we get and how much it costs for us. The threats we face around the world are real. These are significant challenges. They are surmountable. They can be faced and they can be solved. But we don't have forever to do it. And so if you ask me what my number one concern is about our political process, is the lack of urgency about these issues. An attitude that's taken place that we're America, everything always works out in the end. No, that's not true. The fact of the matter is that for over 240 years, each generation of Americans, including your parents, your grandparents, and your great-grandparents, confronted great challenges too. I challenge you to find an era in American history where we didn't have great challenges. The thing is, in each generation before us, they faced those challenges. They confronted them and they solved them. The time has come for us to do that. That's what this moment is about. Whether or not we are going to confront these challenges or solve them, or whether we'll be the first generation of Americans that failed to do so. And there's a role for government to play in solving them. There's no doubt about it. To start with, keeping us safe. That is the most important job of the federal government. It is the reason why we have a federal government. And it's why I think we need to fully fund our military capabilities before we spend a penny on anything else. Keeping us safe is the most important thing in the federal government. By the way, I'm not one of those people that believe America can solve all of the world's problems. We can't. But I also know there are few problems in the world that can be solved without America. It remains the only nation on earth capable of convening other nations to collectively confront a global crisis or a global challenge. And we must continue to play that role, and we can't if we don't have the economic and the military strength to do so. The second thing is we need to become the best place in the world and create the best paying jobs of the new economy. Because we are in a global competition for those jobs. And right now we are increasingly not the best place in the world for some of these industries. And the answer is pretty straightforward why. We have the highest combined business tax rate on the planet in the industrialized world. We have over-regulation. I am not against regulation. Okay, I fly on a lot of airplanes. I'm glad they're regulated. I'm glad someone's looking on those planes and making sure the landing gear works and things of this nature. You know, I have young kids who from time to time require a prescription. I'm glad that what's in that bottle is actually what the label says, because it's regulated. I'm glad that you can drink the water here, you can turn on the tap and not worry about the fact that there's poisons. If you live in Florida, you understand how important our environment is, because so much of our tourism and our lifestyle is driven by the access to the water, access to the nature that God has blessed us with. But over-regulation is the problem. And it often happens because you have these unelected people who have never worked in the industries they're regulating, making decisions that make no sense. And so I've had proposals that I hope will become bipartisan, that place a limit on how much regulations can cost our economy. We have to deal with the national debt. You can't grow and be prosperous if you have a debt crisis. And my friends, we're going to have a debt crisis. Not a question of if, it's a question of when. The reason why is because Social Security and Medicare spend a lot more money than they take in. And they're not reform, they will go bankrupt. Now, my mother's on Social Security and Medicare. I am against any changes to Social Security and Medicare that are bad for my mom, which is a pretty good position to have. But I also recognize that I'm 45, I feel 46, especially after yesterday where my wife made me do some landscape writing. We'll talk about it. So very sore. She didn't make me. I don't tell her I said it. She made me. I wanted to. But let's just say I hope you can't overdose on Advil, because man, I'm hurting. But the point is that, what was the point? Oh yeah. So we can't with a debt crisis. We cannot with a debt crisis, and I recognize that I'm 45 years old, but my Medicare and Social Security is not going to work the same way it did for my parents. It'll still be the best thing in the world. But instead of retiring at 67 like it is under current law, I may have to retire at 67 and a half. That's not too much to ask in order to avoid a debt crisis, not leave our kids with $20 or $25 trillion in debt, and not have to make any changes or any dramatic negative disruptions to the way Social Security and Medicare work for people like my mom who are on it now, or people who are about to retire within that last few years. I think we also have to understand we have to invest again in our people. Because one of the challenges of the new economy is that the skills it requires to succeed in the new economy do not completely overlap with what our traditional higher education system is producing. For the life of me, I don't know why we have stigmatized for so long vocational education in this country. Why did we do that? These are not, as for many years people had this perception, that's for the kids that can't get into college. I promise you, some of these machinists, some of these people, welders, plumbers, pipe fitters, electricians, are making a lot more money than the Greek philosophers. And some of the other, I know, listen, I've already given up on the Greek philosopher vote a long time ago, because I always use that example. I'm not criticizing it. You have a right to study anything you want. Maybe you want to teach philosophy, or I don't know, write a book. But my point is, don't stigmatize these careers at work. I think we should be graduating people from high school ready to work in an industry, in a trade. What if you're 29 years old and you're a single mom, abandoned by the father of your children, and the only way you're ever going to get a raise is if you go back to school, but you can't. Because you can't drop everything and go to school. You got to work. You got to raise those kids, get up at 6 in the morning and make them breakfast, take them to school, go work for 8 or 9 hours, hustle to pick them up before aftercare closes at 6, because then you get the late fees, rush home to make them dinner, make sure they did their homework, it's 11, and you're exhausted, and tomorrow you got to do it again. We've got to create non-traditional ways for people who need to go back to school to be able to go back to school in a way that's time effective and cost effective, and I have proposals that will help us move in that direction, so that people that are now working as a receptionist can become a paralegal, so that the billing clerk at a dental office can become a dental hygienist and double their pay. I've seen people do it, but it's so hard, it's so expensive. I think the issue we talked about here today with early childhood education is critical. We have to break the cycle of poverty, because I want to be honest and blunt, and I hope you'll recognize that this is not just a charity college, this is an investment in America's future. And I'll tell you why it's an investment. Because if you are a child born into a broken family, in an unstable home, in a dangerous neighborhood, with no access to health care, unfortunately trapped into a school that is failing, you've got 5 strikes against you. Do you know how hard it is to make it if you start life with 5 strikes against you? The statistics tell us very, very difficult. The only thing that will stop that is to break that cycle, to deal with those impediments that are standing in the way. And that's what Head Start does, but there's more that needs to be done. To confront those and break them. You know why? It's not just the right thing to do from a moral perspective. It's the right thing to do from an economic perspective. Because these children of God, all of us of whom are valuable, no human being was a mistake. And every single one of these children has talents and abilities. And for all we know, one of these children will one day grow up to cure some horrible disease, or will be the next great idea that will employ hundreds of thousands of people, or will be the great leader that will be able to unify this country. But if they can't overcome those 5 strikes, they'll never get a chance. So this is not just bleeding heart talk. This is the reality about what we confront in our country. We cannot be a great nation. It's a significant percentage of the American family feels locked out and left behind on the promise of America. So that's important for us to do. And I would be remiss if I didn't touch up one more point as I wrap up. And It's something Alan spoke about in his 5 principles when he was speaker, personal responsibility. And personal responsibility is a big part of it. I watch the news coverage on Zika, and you should be concerned about it. It's a big deal. But a key part of it, what's the government going to do? The government needs to do a lot. But what are you going to do? Because we've had mosquitoes forever. And people need to take personal responsibility for that. It's not just about the government. You got to do it. And I want you to know something. We can't be a strong country without strong people. We can't be strong people without strong values. And no one is born with strong values. They have to be taught to you. And a strong family by strong parents. When that's lacking in enough people, the culture breaks down and the country breaks down with it. We need to take more responsibility. Fathers need to be fathers again. Parents need to be parents. They need to be engaged in the lives of their children. And if they are facing impediments, as they often do for a lot of different reasons, and we can help, we should. But in the end, personal responsibility is a big challenge and a big requirement here in order to move forward. So I share all this with you today to acknowledge our challenges, tell you there is opportunity here, and leave you with this. In about 20 or 30 years, historians will write about this period of time in American history. And I believe there are only 2 possible outcomes. They will either write that our children became the freest, the most prosperous Americans that ever lived, or they will write that this was the first generation that failed to live up to the challenge of their moment. And our children became the first generation of Americans worse off than their parents. This is the crossroads where we're at. We've been here before as a nation, and each time, each generation made the right choice. Now the time has come for us to make the right choice. And if we make the right choice and we do what needs to be done, then I want you to feel uplifted and excited about the fact that not only will we be better off, but our children and our grandchildren will be freer and more prosperous than any people or any Americans that have ever lived. That is our goal, that is our task, I believe that is our destiny, and I believe together we can achieve it. So I thank you for the chance to talk to you about all these things today. Thank you.